How do we compare strings in C#? You can compare strings in C# using the equality operator, the equals method, or the String.Compare method. And knowing when and how to use each one of them can make or break your code. In this video, I'm going to try to explain what the difference is, how to compare strings in C#, what to watch for, and how you can avoid some common mistakes. The strings in C# are reference types, and they are also immutable, but all the three methods that we're going to use to compare strings, such as the equality operator, the equals method, and the String.Compare method, actually perform value comparison, and they check if the contents of the strings are equal. Let's start with the first one, the equality operator, and show a simple example and see how that works. I'm going to create two strings. Name 1 equals John, and we're going to have name 2 equals Susan. And now let's print the result when we compare the two strings. Console, write line, and we're going to print name 1 equals name 2. So let's run the code and see the result. And we get false. So the name 1 is not equal to name 2. Now let's try something else. We're going to make both strings John. Let's run the code again. And now we're getting true, which means that the equality operator compares the values of the two strings and returns true. Now let's see if this is case sensitive or not. And we're going to run it again. And we get false. So the equality operator is by default case sensitive. Let's see what is going to happen when one of the strings is null. Okay, is using the equality operator going to throw an exception or return false or return true? What do you think the outcome is? Well, let me wrap my code in try catch just in case, and we're going to print our exception, console write line, and we're going to print the exception message if there is an exception. And I'm going to move my code right here. We don't need these. Let's run the code and see what happens. And we'll get false. Using the equality operator, you can compare two strings if one of them is null or both of them are null, and you are not going to get an exception. But of course, if both of them are null, you're going to now get the result as true, which means that the equality operator checks the values of both strings and returns true if they are both null, and it returns false if one of them is a valid string and the other one is null. And that is all that you need to know for now about the equality operator when you compare strings. Now let's see how we can use the equals method to compare strings in C#. We're going to use more or less the same examples, and I'm going to rename the two strings string 1, and I'm going to call the second one string 2, and we're going to use the equals method to compare these strings values. Remember, we are comparing the values of the strings, and we have string 1 John, string 2 John. Let's run the code and see what happens, and we get true, which is expected. Again, let's see if this is case sensitive by default. We're going to make the second string with lowercase, and let's run the code again, and we get false, which means that the equals method is case sensitive, much similar to the equality operator. And we're going to make the second string null, and let's run it again. And when we have one of the strings null, we get false. Now you need to be careful, because if I make the first string null, I'm going to get an exception. And you can see we get a warning here, which says that string 1 may be null. And if I run the code, I'm going to get an exception, which says object reference not set to an instance of an object. So let's see what else can we use with the equals method and why it is different from the equality operator, what other options we have. So let's check the constructors quickly. We have the constructor that we're currently using, and we have the constructor that we can use with the string comparison enum. And if we take a look at the options, so let's quickly expand this. You can see that the string comparison has several options: current culture, ignore case, invariant culture, ignore case, ordinal, and ordinal ignore case. Let's quickly discuss each one of these options, and then we're going to use some of them in our code. The string comparison enumeration in C# provides various options for comparing strings based on the culture, case sensitivity, and the sorting rules. And you can pause the screen and take a look at the options. I will quickly discuss them. The current culture compares the strings using the current culture rules, which are based on the culture settings of the environment, and these are typically the language and the region settings. And this is actually case sensitive. And the next option is the current culture ignore case, which is the same as the current culture, but the option is case insensitive. And then we get the invariant culture, and this option compares the strings using the culture sensitive rules, but based on the invariant culture, which is culture neutral and consistent across environments. And it is also case sensitive. Again, the invariant culture ignore case is similar to the invariant culture, but it ignores the case, which means it is case insensitive. And then we get the ordinal option, which compares strings using the ordinal or binary sort rules. And finally, we have the ordinal ignore case, which compared to the ordinal is case insensitive. Here's a simple code snippet, which we're going to use to demonstrate how strings are compared based on using a different culture. We have several English words: banana, orange, apple, and grape, and 2 Danish words. This one means apple, I believe, and this one means beer. And we're going to run our program and see how these words are compared and sorted using the current culture that I have on my computer, which is a US culture, and then we change the culture to Danish, and we're going to see if this is going to make any difference. So let's run the program quickly, and you can see the results. The first one is sorting the array using the US culture, and we get the apple Danish word on top, followed by apple, banana, grape, and then the Danish word for beer, and finally we get orange. And you can see that the sorting order is quite different when we're using the Danish culture. We get apple, banana, grape, orange, and then the 2 Danish words for apple and beer. So when you compare 2 strings using the different culture can make a difference. You need to be aware of that. And here's another example which demonstrates the use of invariant culture and ordinal when we sort array of strings. And what we're going to do in our code, we have our array with the words apple, apple with uppercase, banana, and the Danish word for apple. And first we display them in their original order. Then we sort the array using invariant culture, we print them, and we sort the array using ordinal, and we print them again. Let's run the code and see if there is any difference. And you can see our original order and followed by the sorted array when we used invariant culture, and the sorted array with ordinal, and you can see there is a difference. And let's quickly discuss why this is the case. When using invariant culture, the 2 apple with lowercase and uppercase are actually considered equivalent in terms of sorting, and the Danish word for apple with that accent is accent sensitive, and this is why it is separate. And when it is sorted with ordinal, the sorting uses the binary values, which means that we're going to have the apple with uppercase on top and followed by the apple and then banana, and finally we're going to have the Danish word for apple. So you need to be aware that there is a difference when using a variant culture and ordinal and when you use them to compare strings. Now let's discuss the final method that we can use to compare strings in C#. This is the String.Compare method. Let's create our example. We're going to have string1 equals John, and we're going to have string2 equals John. Let's leave it like that for now, and we're going to use the String.Compare method, which returns an integer, and we're going to compare the two strings, and let's see what the result is. Okay, we actually need to print it. Console, right line, result, and the result is 0 when the two strings are equal. Now let's see if one of them is uppercase and the other one is lowercase. Let's see what the difference is. And we get 1, and if I swap the strings and run it, we're going to get -1. So let's explain how the String.Compare method works. This method, as we saw already, returns an integer, and it works by comparing each character of the strings. And we can demonstrate this. If we have two strings, one is AAAB and the other one is AAAC, and if I run the code, we're going to get -1, which means that the string1 is actually greater than string2, and by greater or less than, again, we compare the characters of the strings one by one. And if I have to quickly summarize the results that the method returns, we're going to get 0 if they are equal. We're going to get a negative value if string1 is less than string2, and we're going to get a positive value if string1 is greater than string2. And again, let's check the constructor of the method, and we can also use the string comparison enum, much like we did with the equals method. Let's do a very quick test. I'm going to change the string1 to apple and the string2 to apple with uppercase. If I run the code, I'm going to get -1. But what is going to happen if I use string comparison ordinal ignore case, and let's run the code, and we're going to get 0, which means that the two strings are deemed equal when you use ordinal ignore case. Let's run a quick example where one of the strings is null and see what is going to happen. We don't need this option here, so let's run it, and we're going to get a -1. And if I change the strings, if I swap them around, we're going to get 1. The String.Compare method returns 0, -1, or 1, and it has several constructors where you can use bool ignore case, you can use string comparison, culture info, and so on. If you want to check them out, you can do so on your own and test them. Now let's quickly summarize the 3 methods that we can use in C# to compare strings. First, choosing the right method. For simple exact equality checks, you can use the equality operator, and you can use the equals method when you compare strings and you want to have more control over the case sensitivity and the culture, and you can use String.Compare, which is actually ideal for sorting or ordering strings with additional options as well. You need to also consider performance. In most cases, using string comparison ordinal or ordinal ignore case is the fastest option, and you should avoid using current culture and invariant culture unless it is needed. Pause the screen, read the text, but you need to be aware of the performance of each one of the three methods that you can use to compare strings in C#. And here are some of the common mistakes that programmers make when comparing strings and how you can avoid them. When you compare using the equals method, you need to make sure that the first one is actually not null. If it is, you're going to get an exception, and you can use string is null or empty to check for null. And the second common mistake is forgetting to specify string comparison when using equals, especially if you want to make sure that the case is ignored, or if you want to specify the culture, and so on. And that is all for me for today. Thank you for watching.